On this day, the road workers had no idea that an unexpected discovery was waiting for them in the midst of garbage and yellowed grasses along the side of the highway. A red luggage case stood out like a sore thumb against the wilted vegetation. At first, they thought that someone had simply forgotten their suitcase, but their intuition told them something else. With a disturbing premonition, the men opened the case and froze in horror. The body of a young woman lay there, curled up in an unnatural position. Even for the experienced workers, it was a chilling reminder of the horrific crime that had taken place. As it turned out, this young woman had suffered one of the most brutal deaths imaginable. Valeria Reyes, 24, grew up in a cozy suburb of New York City in a loving family. She was the eldest daughter, who was trusted by her three younger brothers. From an early age, Valerie was distinguished by her cheerful disposition, sincere smile, and ability to get along with people. So it was no surprise that she was always surrounded by a wide circle of friends. Valeria's relationship with her mother was especially close. The women shared their most intimate secrets as if they were best friends. Valeria had many talents. She was good at drawing, singing, and dreamed of becoming a professional tattoo artist. Under the guidance of her older brother, who had already achieved some success in this field, she persevered in her studies. Together, they planned to open a studio where they could realize their creative ideas. Meanwhile, Valeria worked part-time in a small cozy bookstore, where a special atmosphere of knowledge and creativity always reigned. In January 2018, Valeria's life changed dramatically. On a popular dating site, she met an attractive and gallant 26-year-old Venezuelan, Javier de Silva, who had recently moved to New York. The young man told her a touching story about how he had to flee his crisis-ridden homeland to save his own life. Because of this, he never finished his college education. Now Javier was working hard in a restaurant, trying to build a new life in a foreign land. Valeria was truly saddened by the fate of a bright man in a difficult situation. After a few dates, romantic feelings flared up between the young people. Their relationship developed rapidly and violently, but lasted only 3 months. Javier turned out to be too intrusive and was already hinting at an imminent marriage, which scared the girl. Valeria felt that everything was happening too quickly, because she was not yet ready for such a serious step. So having grown wiser, she decided to end the affair. At first, Javier made a good impression on Valeria's family. He seemed to genuinely care about the girl and wanted only the best for her. But as soon as she expressed her desire to end the relationship, his behavior changed dramatically. Javier refused to accept the breakup and tried to get Valeria back in every way possible. He sent her dozens of messages every day, arranged random meetings in public, and begged for reconciliation. One September day in 2018, Javier called Valeria with a strange story. Allegedly, he had accidentally used her bank card to pay for something online. Now, he desperately needed to meet her and return the money. But Valeria immediately suspected a trick. Most likely it was just an excuse to see him again. She checked with her friend and asked her to deal with Javier herself so that he would never bother her about it again. It seemed that a serious conversation with her friend really worked on the persistent suitor. The calls stopped, and no more messages were received. Valeria breathed a sigh of relief. She could finally return to her normal life, full of small joys and exciting plans for the future. But she had no idea that the worst was yet to come. On January 24, 2019, a strange incident occurred. Javier wrote to an old friend of his that he had caught Valeria in bed with another man. This message caused the girl's surprise and indignation because it could not be true. She and Javier had long since broken up and had no contact with each other. In addition, Valeria had been dating another guy all this time. So why would Javier make up such a strange story? January 27th was a very joyful day for Valeria. She and her family were celebrating her father's birthday. Nothing seemed to portend trouble. But the next evening, when she returned home after her shift at the bookstore, she called her mother in a state of near hysteria. She was sobbing and screaming into the phone that someone was trying to kill her. Valeria admitted that she had been suffering from obsessive anxiety for several days and constantly felt someone's ominous presence. The news of the brutal murders of women in their own homes made her paranoid. The girl no longer felt safe in her apartment. Trying to calm her daughter down, her mother asked her if she was afraid of anyone in particular. But Valeria could not answer anything. She just kept sobbing into the phone. After a long conversation, the girl seemed to calm down a bit. They agreed that the next day the mother would come to her and stay until her daughter felt better. Before going to bed, Valeria sent her mother a message that she had calmed down and was going to sleep. She had no idea that these words would be her last to her family. The next morning, January 29th, the worried mother waited in vain for a call from her daughter. Numerous attempts to call Valeria's cell phone were unsuccessful. After several rings, the phone went to voicemail. Around noon, the worried woman decided to go to her daughter's apartment and make sure she was okay. At work at the bookstore, Valeria was also waited on in vain. Usually punctual and diligent, this time she did not show up for her shift and did not inform anyone of her absence. This had never happened before because she valued her position and the team she had been working with for about 2 years. The bewildered manager tried to call Valeria, but to no avail. The phone was turned off. Anxiety quickly spread throughout the family. Valeria didn't show up for the dinner she had been looking forward to and planning since yesterday. Her family dialed her number again and again, but encountered a deafening wall of silence. Recalling the recent disturbing conversation, they felt the icy fingers of fear squeezing their hearts. On the morning of January 30th, it became clear that the family could not cope alone. They went to the police and filed a report on Valeria's disappearance. The investigators' first suspect was Valeria's ex-boyfriend, Javier, whose sinister intentions the family immediately informed them of. A thorough inspection of the girl's apartment did not yield any significant clues. There were no signs of a struggle or hints that Valeria had been taken away by force. The only unusual detail was small bloodstains on the pillowcase in the bathroom. However, the police decided that it could have been a simple cut or nosebleed. Law enforcement officers immediately began searching for the missing woman. After contacting her mobile operator, they learned that Valeria's phone had been switched to airplane mode on the night of January 28th at about 3 in the morning. It has not been turned on since then. But the most disturbing fact was the information that someone had accessed her cloud storage and thoroughly studied all her photos, videos, and messages. It seemed that the criminal was trying to find the information he needed. Another disturbing detail is that at 5 a.m. on January 29th, 2 hours after the phone was turned off, someone withdrew $1,000 from Valeria's bank account. Surveillance cameras captured a man driving up to the ATM in a black Honda, quickly taking the money and disappearing. Valeria herself was not seen in the vicinity. Using the car's license plate number, law enforcement officers quickly determined that the car belonged to Javier, the same ex-boyfriend that the missing girl's mother had immediately identified. He was automatically included in the list of prime suspects. During the search of Javier's house, no direct evidence of his involvement in Valeria's disappearance was found. However, surveillance footage showed that on the evening of January 28th, he left his home in a black Honda and headed to his ex-girlfriend's place of residence. Investigators personally checked Valeria's phone. There had been no incoming calls or messages from Javier in recent months. Obviously, the girl had not invited him or arranged a meeting. So what was he doing there at night uninvited? Even more suspicious was Javier's strange behavior immediately after these events. He turned off his phone so that his movements could not be tracked. At 6 a.m., his cell phone turned on briefly near Harrison, Connecticut. At 7:30, the device was detected in Greenwich. It was only at 9:43 that Javier returned home to Queens, which was confirmed by cameras near his home. He came home in different clothes than he had worn in the evening. Javier brought a small duffel bag with him, which he carried into the house and left without it a few minutes later. All of this was very disturbing to the detectives. Later, investigators found out another interesting detail. On the eve of Valeria's disappearance, Javier posted an old photo of them together on Instagram. Why did he do this? Maybe he wanted to show everyone that they were still together, or was it a hint to someone? While the police were gradually making progress in their investigation, Valeria's family and friends kept trying to find the girl on their own. They put up posters with her photo, asked all their friends and passers-by if anyone had seen her, and checked all the places she usually visited. However, none of the leads led to a result. A week passed in anxious anticipation, sleepless nights followed by exhausting searches. And then, on February 5th, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. Road workers spotted the same red luggage case, which immediately led them to their worst suspicions. When they opened it, What they saw made them immediately call the police. Inside the case was the mutilated body of a young woman. Her hands and feet were tightly tied with rope. Her mouth was sealed with a thick layer of duct tape. Her light shirt was torn, and her jeans were torn and soiled. The girl was not wearing shoes. The attention was drawn to the terrible wound on her head, which had recently been oozing blood. The forensic team quickly identified the deceased as Valeria Reyes, who had gone missing the day before. Her parents recognized their beloved daughter, despite the terrible state of her body. During the autopsy, the gruesome details of the murder came to light. Before her death, the girl was hit hard on the head with a blunt object, and then, while still alive, she was stuffed into a suitcase and left to die. The last moments of Valeria's life, locked in a cramped space, were filled with unbearable pain and despair. She died slowly and painfully from lack of oxygen. All the evidence pointed to Javier da Silva's involvement in this brutal murder. However, it was not easy to prove his guilt. The only direct evidence was Valeria's bank card found in his wallet. During interrogation, the suspect gave an extremely dubious version of events. He claimed that he had accidentally found the card and the girl's identification documents in a bar. This sounded implausible and raised even more questions. The investigators presented Javier with all the information they had gathered: surveillance footage, details about his car, and the movement of his phone that fateful night. They assured him that they knew about his presence in Valeria's apartment. Then the suspect changed his story. He admitted that he had been very drunk that night and could indeed have come to Valeria's place. But he did not remember anything. However, when the detective showed him a photo of his ex-girlfriend's mutilated body in a suitcase, Javier broke down. He confessed and burst into tears. He began to try to justify himself in a confused and incoherent manner. According to his version, he came to Valeria's house that night at her invitation. They had consensual sex, albeit in a rough way, but at some point the girl fell and hit her head on the floor, losing consciousness. Javier insisted that he tried to help his beloved. He performed artificial respiration and heart massage, but it was all in vain. Afraid that he might be accused of murder, he tried to hide the traces of the crime. He tied Valeria up, taped her mouth shut, put her in a suitcase, and took her out of town. According to him, he did all this in a state of passion, not realizing what he was doing. When the investigators asked why he had to tie and tape the mouth of a motionless, possibly dead girl, Javier could not answer. Then he began to tell a completely unbelievable story. He claimed that he had deliberately used Valeria's card and car to get into the police's sights as quickly as possible. In his opinion, this would have made the investigation easier. Javier then spent another $4,350 from the victim's account. During the searches of the suspect's apartment, the police found Valeria's phone and laptop, which he managed to take away. Initially, Javier tried to destroy these things by throwing them into the river, but then for some reason he returned and retrieved them. Thanks to the victim's fingerprints, he was able to access Valeria's cloud storage and an app that showed the balance on her card. For investigators, the whole story sounded extremely implausible and contradictory. There were too many unconvincing coincidences and inconsistencies. They immediately suspected Javier of premeditated, pre-planned murder of Valeria, and the available evidence only confirmed his guilt. In the end, the suspect's version of the case finally fell apart after a thorough examination of the body. It showed signs of struggle and violence. Blood and DNA of the killer were found under the girl's nails, on her skin and clothes. Javier's fingerprints were found on Valeria's neck and chest. His genetic material was everywhere, on the suitcase, in the car, on the victim's belongings. It became clear that he had committed this heinous crime in a thoughtful and consistent manner. The suspect was immediately arrested and officially charged with the brutal murder of 24-year-old Valeria Reyes. Under the pressure of overwhelming evidence, Javier da Silva eventually pleaded guilty in court. On February 5, 2020, a hearing was held in the case of the premeditated murder of Valeria Reyes. In his speech, the prosecutor drew the jury's attention to the defendant's thoughtful, consistent actions, how he closely followed the victim's every move, obsessively pursued her, and then brutally murdered her. During the court hearing, Javier had to listen to many angry accusations from Valeria's grieving family. Her mother's speech was particularly emotional. She could not hold back her tears and could barely speak through her sobs. She called her daughter's murderer a real monster, selfish, heartless and cruel. Javier's lawyers tried to justify his actions as a sudden outburst of anger and jealousy. They talked about the defendant's difficult childhood, his depressive state after breaking up with Valeria, and his drug use shortly before the tragedy. They claimed that all this affected his emotional state and pushed him to make the fatal decision. They even read out several letters from former friends from Venezuela who characterized Javier as a sensitive and decent guy who had simply lost his way. But these attempts did not affect the jury's opinion at all. On September 3, 2021, the court handed down a sentence of 30 years in prison. For 28-year-old Javier da Silva, this actually meant spending most of his life behind bars. In addition, as it turned out during the investigation, the defendant was in the United States illegally. He entered the country on May 8, 2017, under a visa waiver program. However, his 90-day stay expired on August 5th of the same year. Javier ignored this requirement and continued to stay in the United States in violation of the law. Therefore, after serving his 30-year sentence, he will be immediately deported to his home country, Venezuela. And there he will probably face another trial. Valeria Reyes's death came as a real shock to her family. They had no idea that a simple acquaintance on social media could lead to such a terrible tragedy. This high-profile case has made many people think about the dangers of virtual relationships and the threats that lurk in the real world. Valeria will forever be remembered by her family as a bright, cheerful, and devoted girl whose life ended too soon and too cruelly. I hope this story has not left anyone indifferent. Let the case of Valeria Reyes be a warning to each of us. Be careful, don't trust strangers, and don't hesitate to ask for help if you feel threatened. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Ardeth Wood, an attractive 27-year-old, was not only beautiful, but also extremely intelligent. She was on her way to earning a doctorate in philosophy at the University of Waterloo, while also working as an editor for a philosophy journal. Ardeth's dream of becoming a professor was about to come true. When the summer of 2003 arrived, Ardeth decided to spend her vacation visiting her family in Ottawa, Canada. She spent a wonderful time with her family, going out together and cooking at home. On the morning of August 6th, the young woman went for a run. When she returned, her caring parents were waiting for her with a delicious dessert for breakfast. On that warm and sunny day, Ardeth wanted to go for a bike ride. Her brother kindly let her borrow his bike. She promised to return in a couple of hours. Her mother was planning to go shopping that day before lunch, waiting for her daughter to return from her ride. Ardeth liked to ride her bike along a scenic path through the forest, past a river and rocks. This path was popular with local cyclists. It was usually peaceful and safe, but not this time. Ardeth, 27, never returned home. Her mother became worried, and soon a heavy downpour began. The woman realized that her daughter would not ride her bike in such bad weather, but time passed, and she did not return. The family went in search of her, thinking that she might have fallen off her bike and needed help. The bike trails stretched all over the city, and they didn't know which direction Ardeth had gone this time, so her family looked everywhere. Their efforts were in vain, and when it got dark, they turned to the police. The search was postponed until morning due to bad weather. A large-scale search. The next day, there was no news about Ardeth. One of the largest search operations in Ottawa's history was launched. It involved rescuers, police, dog handlers, and helicopters. In total, about 1,000 people were involved, including numerous volunteers. Ardeth's family actively joined the search, posting advertisements with the girl's photo throughout the city. However, the first few days brought no progress. The police appealed to the public for help. Soon they received a call from a local resident. She said that on the day of Ardeth's disappearance, she was in the forest on a bike trail and saw a suspicious man with a bicycle. The witness described him as a young, pleasant-looking man, well-dressed, but he behaved extremely suspiciously. His behavior was frightening. It turned out that the stranger tried to push her off the bike and drag her into the bushes. Luckily, other people appeared on the trail, and the offender fell behind, while she managed to quickly escape. After this incident, she no longer felt safe walking and stopped riding alone. According to her, it happened in an area called Green Creek. She suggested that a stranger could have also attacked Ardeth. The witness was invited to the police station to make a composite sketch of the suspect. She described him as a young man in his 20s or 30s, light-skinned, dark-haired with a beard and glasses, with a pleasant appearance and athletic build. The portrait was shown to Ardette's family, but they did not recognize anyone familiar to the girl. At that time, many men wore similar glasses and beards, so suspicion could fall on anyone. The police decided not to publish the portrait in the media, fearing a wave of false calls. Law enforcement officers constantly asked local residents for help, showing Ardette's photo. They were convinced that such a bright, beautiful girl with a memorable appearance could not have been overlooked. Someone must have seen her and could have provided a clue. This assumption turned out to be correct. 16-year-old Laura called the police. She said that on the day she disappeared, she had seen Ardette on a bike path while riding by on her bike. The missing woman was sitting on a rock, as if resting. As Laura rode on, she heard a scream, and when she looked back, she saw Ardette arguing with a man. Laura didn't know what to think. Perhaps it was just a quarrel between lovers. Ardette didn't call for help, and then went into the forest with the man. Laura wanted to know what was going on, but she was afraid. Seeing a thunderstorm approaching, the 16-year-old witness hurried home. While walking, she seemed to hear another scream. The police received several other calls from girls who had encountered this horrible man on the trail. He attacked them, but the victims were lucky to escape. One call from a woman stood out in particular. She described how an attractive stranger approached her while she was walking. They had a pleasant conversation, but suddenly his behavior changed dramatically. The man started grabbing her, but the woman managed to push the attacker away with her bicycle and quickly ran away. She did not even look back, fearing that he would catch up with her. When she returned home, she told her family about the incident and warned them to stay away from the area. Surprisingly, none of the girls who were attacked reported the incident to the police. The search for Ardette centered around the area near the creek. Her bicycle was soon found, indicating that the police were on the right track. In the meantime, investigators received another call that was a breakthrough in the case. A man who did not give his name reported an unpleasant incident in the forest, allegedly a terrible accident. Allegedly, he did not want to harm Ardette or take her life. Confused, he decided to get rid of the body. The stranger carried the girl across the stream, dug a shallow hole and buried her there, covering the grave with branches. Then he hung up the phone. The police managed to trace the call. It came from a phone booth 20 minutes outside of Ottawa. Law enforcement officers rushed there, hoping to find witnesses or lift fingerprints or DNA from the handset. But they were disappointed. Someone had thoroughly wiped the handset clean. No witnesses or video surveillance could be found. The search for Ardette continued near Green Creek. Dogs trained to detect the scent of corpses arrived. Soon, the worst fears of the family and the police were confirmed. With the help of the dogs, they managed to find the grave of the missing woman between two trees in a quiet, picturesque spot. Approaching, the detective saw the girl's half-buried naked body. Probably the criminal was frightened by someone, which is why he buried the victim so carelessly. Criminologists began to examine the crime scene, but unfortunately, they found no evidence, no fingerprints, no DNA. The medical examiner confirmed that it was Ardette Wood. She had suffered a horrible, agonizing death that did not look like an accident, contrary to what the stranger told the police. The cause of death was drowning. Algae was found in her lungs, which means that she was still alive when she was in the water. Despite the fact that the body was found naked, forensic experts did not find any clear signs of rape, although they did not rule it out. The police believed that the crime was sexually motivated. In their opinion, the stranger was hunting for girls in a remote location for this purpose. Otherwise, what could have driven him? Detectives urgently needed to catch the criminal to prevent new victims. They were convinced that he had already attacked several girls and killed one. How far could the maniac go? The police decided to publish a composite portrait of the suspect in the media, asking the public for help in identifying him. Investigators received about 4,000 tips and began to process them, which took a lot of time. On September 10th, the police released important information about the suspect. It turned out that the girls who had seen the stranger in the forest had noticed one detail. He had a tattoo of an eagle on his left shoulder, It was a crucial clue that could help track down the criminal. The media published a sketch of the tattoo, after which the police received several calls. People reported people they knew with bird tattoos on their faces, necks, or backs. However, this information led nowhere. In April 2004, while processing another batch of calls, investigators came across an important clue. A man claimed to know the killer. This man lived in the neighborhood and was riding his bike near Green Creek at the time of the murder. Detectives were interested in this information and invited this suspect to talk to them. When the man walked into the police station, investigators were impressed. He matched the description of the perpetrator both in appearance and age. During the conversation, he was visibly nervous. The man said he often cycled on that path, not realizing what the problem was. When the police asked him to show them his shoulder, they found a tattoo of an eagle. It turned out that the man had a history of trouble with the law. He became the main suspect. The interrogation lasted 3 hours. All this time, the suspect was answering questions aggressively and defiantly. He said about himself, "I am like a scorpion under a stone. You never know what I will do." The suspect had no alibi, but could not explain what he was doing on the day Ardette disappeared. However, he denied any involvement in the girl's murder. The evidence against him was insufficient, so the suspect was released, but placed under round-the-clock surveillance. A few weeks later, he was summoned for questioning again. The detectives gathered a lot of information about him and carefully prepared the questions. They also offered the man to take a polygraph test. The suspect agreed and easily passed all the tests. The police couldn't believe it, but were forced to let him go, to remove all suspicions. The investigation came to a standstill. The Ottawa police announced a $50,000 reward for any information leading to the case. It was the largest amount that law enforcement had ever offered in such circumstances. Soon, about 5,000 calls came in with tips, which the police began to check. One piece of information mentioned the name of Christopher Myers, which attracted the attention of investigators. It turned out that he had previous convictions for selling illegal substances. Colleagues described 25-year-old Chris as a quiet, unassuming, and even unremarkable guy who worked as a janitor. His face was strikingly similar to the composite portrait of the suspect. Moreover, he had the same beard. The police were excited, thinking they had finally found the man they were looking for, but it turned out that Christopher had an alibi for the day Ardette disappeared. The landlady of the apartment he was renting claimed that on August 6, 2003, the young man was at home in the morning and then went to work at a restaurant. This surprised the police, because a year had already passed. How could this woman remember the details of that day so clearly? Another problem arose. Christopher did not have an eagle tattoo on his shoulder. Although witnesses insisted that they had seen it on him, it was possible that he had removed it. Detectives were convinced that this was the man they were looking for and had to prove it. A few weeks later, another similar attack took place. Chapter 6. Bloody Crimes. In the evening, a girl who looked very much like Ardette was walking alone across the bridge when she heard someone following her. She looked back and saw an attractive man on a bicycle. The girl had no intention of introducing herself or talking to him. She asked him to leave her alone. The man rode past her, and she breathed a sigh of relief. But the stranger turned his bike around and ran right at her. No one was around to help. The attacker jumped off the bike and dragged the victim into the bushes. The girl was screaming very loudly, which seemed to scare the attacker. He ran away. The victim went to the police. Other investigators took up the case. Everyone believed it was an attempted robbery, and the detectives investigating Ardette's disappearance learned about the incident much later. In May, there was another attack on a tall blonde woman who looked like the missing person. The girl was returning from a party late at night when a stranger approached her and tried to strike up a conversation. She asked him to leave her alone. Then he started asking for help, claiming to be lost. The girl explained where to go, and he left. She breathed a sigh of relief, but literally 10 minutes later, he attacked her from the bushes. The attacker violently began to strangle her, twisting her neck. At that moment, the girl thought it was over, but she continued to resist, screaming, hitting him, biting him. Her screams attracted the attention of the residents of the house, who came out to see what was happening. This scared the perpetrator, and he ran away. But this time, he made a serious mistake. In his haste, he dropped his phone. Investigators found that the cell phone belonged to Christopher Myers, whom they suspected of Ardeth's murder. Everything fell into place. Chris committed all these similar crimes. He chose girls of similar appearance, blondes, and attacked them. Christopher was summoned for questioning, but he was in no hurry to confess to the murder. He claimed that he had never been to Green Creek, had never seen Ardeth, and was not involved in the other attacks. Chris complained of mental health problems and uncontrollable aggression, but insisted that he had not physically harmed anyone. The detectives noticed that he had a crooked tooth and convinced him to take a polygraph test. The test lasted 5 hours, and Chris failed miserably. But despite this, he continued to insist on his innocence, saying that the polygraph was wrong. Since the lie detector results were not considered evidence, the suspect had to be released. For the next 5 months, detectives gathered evidence against him by questioning everyone who knew Christopher: relatives, friends, colleagues, and his ex-girlfriend. It turned out that Christopher was born into a dysfunctional family of alcoholics. His difficult childhood was accompanied by the development of various mental disorders, attention deficit disorder, and schizoid disorder. Chris was taken away from his biological parents and adopted by another couple. The adoptive parents treated the boy with love, but he was uncontrollable. They could not cope with raising a problem child and returned him to the orphanage when Chris turned 12. As he grew older, he seemed to become a regular, normal boy. Christopher graduated from high school, went to university, hung out with friends, and lived in a dormitory. But his roommate thought Chris was not normal. He told horrible stories that scared her. Eventually, she kicked him out of the room. His ex-girlfriend revealed his biggest secret. Christopher loved temporary tattoos. For a while, he had an exact tattoo of an eagle on his left shoulder. The girl was shown a sketch of the tattoo, and she confirmed that he had one on his left shoulder. Christopher was summoned for interrogation on October 13, 2005. He was placed in a very cramped interrogation room. This time, the interrogation was conducted by harsh men who moved their chairs close to him. All this put enormous psychological pressure on the suspect. The investigators started with simple words. "We know everything about you, Chris. We know that you killed Ardeth." Christopher answered evasively. 3 hours later, he began to testify, confused and incoherent. Chris admitted that he had been in Green Creek that day and met Ardeth. Impressed by her beauty, he decided to get to know her. He started complimenting her, making small talk, and then invited her into the woods, and she accepted. Once there, Christopher started hugging and kissing her, showing the investigators how, and then, according to him, it was over. Ardeth pulled away from him. It seems she did not like his manners. She ran away, but fell into a stream. Christopher tried to save the girl, but failed. He wanted to portray himself as a hero, but his subsequent actions were completely inconsistent with this. For some reason, he pulled Ardeth's body out of the water, undressed it, and buried it. When the investigator said that Chris would be charged with murder, he immediately recanted his words. "No, I never met her. It was a joke. I got all the information from the newspapers." The detective had to have a serious talk with him in private. Eventually, Chris confessed to Ardeth's murder. He even drew a map of the trails in Green Creek where he met the girl. On it, he marked another person, probably 16-year-old Laura, who had seen him with the victim in the woods. Laura recognized the suspect as the same person she had seen at the time. Christopher was arrested on October 20th, 2005. He agreed to go to the crime scene to reconstruct the events. But when they arrived at the designated trail, Christopher suddenly claimed that it was the wrong place, claiming that everything happened somewhere else, even though everything matched. Christopher had an unstable psyche. He would give testimony and then recant it. Later, he also admitted his involvement in other attacks on the girls. He was charged with additional crimes in these cases. At the trial, his lawyer stated that Christopher was just a troubled young man. Initially, the defendant denied his previous confession, but later, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to make a deal with the investigation and plead guilty. On January 8, 2008, 5 years after the murder, the defendant pleaded guilty to the crime, but refused to disclose motives and details. Later, he also admitted to other attacks. The prosecution believed that it was no accident that Chris appeared on the forest path that day. He was stalking his victim like a hunter. He attacked several girls who were lucky enough to escape. The likely motive was sexual violence. Ardeth was not lucky that day. She was Chris's type, an attractive blonde. He tried to get to know her, but something went wrong, and a quarrel broke out between them, which was overheard by a 16-year-old girl who was passing by on her bicycle. Under some pretext, the criminal managed to lure Ardeth into the forest. There he attacked her and began to undress her, intending to rape her. To escape, the girl ran away and jumped into a stream. Chris rushed after her, caught up with her and drowned her, then buried her body. The victim's parents agreed with the prosecution's version of events. In their opinion, Ardeth was a good swimmer and could not have drowned in the creek. In their opinion, the defendant deliberately drowned the girl. However, it remained a mystery to them how Christopher managed to persuade Ardeth to go with him into the forest. According to the agreement with the investigation, Christopher pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole, only after 10 years of serving his sentence. In 2020, he filed a petition for parole, but the commission rejected it, recognizing the high risk of reoffending against women. In 2007, a plaque in Ardeth's honor was installed on one of the centuries-old oaks in Green Creek Park. And in 2017, during a powerful thunderstorm similar to the one that occurred on the day of her murder, lightning struck the same tree. The oak was severely damaged, and experts did not believe it would survive. But a miracle happened. The mighty tree survived. It still grows as a living monument to the girl who was killed nearby. Share your thoughts in the comments, leave a like if this story touched you, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. Every year, the tropical paradise of Thailand attracts many travelers who want to enjoy the spectacular scenery and the ringing silence of this land. However, in 2019, a lonely tourist, Miriam Belt, who interrupted her business trip to visit the legendary white sandy coast of Thailand, suffered a terrible tragedy. During one of the excursions, the girl tragically died. When the investigation began, the police quickly realized that Miriam's death was not an accident. Subsequently, law enforcement officers discovered CCTV footage that helped uncover the gruesome truth. Our story takes place on one of Thailand's islands, Koh Chin, located in the Gulf of Thailand, which washes the east coast of the central part of the country. According to statistics, the population of Koh Chin is about 7,000 people. Despite the fact that the island is located near the capital Bangkok, it is not as popular among tourists as other resort destinations. Fishing is the main source of income and the engine of Cochabamba's economy, providing the main income for the locals. However, this has not stopped the friendly islanders from warmly welcoming travelers. Koh Chin is especially attractive to those who seek authenticity and want to immerse themselves in the real life of Thai people, learn about their customs, traditions, and culture. In March 2019, Miriam Belt, a 26-year-old native of the German city of Hildesheim, who went on an independent trip to Thailand, visited the island of Koh Chang. Since her school days, the girl has been distinguished by her diligence and extraordinary abilities. After completing her secondary education, Miriam entered the University of Hanover, where she studied mechanical engineering in depth for 5 years and later earned a master's degree. Thanks to the thorough knowledge and professional skills she gained during her studies, she quickly found a decent job and started working as an engineer in a small design company. In mid-2018, Miriam changed jobs, moving to a larger company specializing in automotive manufacturing. There, she took a position as a design engineer. At the time of her trip to Thailand in 2019, Miriam was living in her native Hildesheim with her parents, as she was not in a serious relationship at the time. She devoted almost all of her free time to the work and activities of her international company, which often sent her abroad on business trips. At the end of March 2019, Miriam's employers sent her on another business trip. This time, the engineer had to fly to Southeast Asia to hold a series of important negotiations with several key suppliers. Although she loved traveling and discovering new parts of the world, a business trip was always different from a real vacation, during which she could completely relax and enjoy the benefits of being a tourist. So this time, Miriam decided to combine work and leisure in a smart way and stay in Thailand for a few extra days after the business trip was over. She had heard a lot about the incredible white sandy beaches, turquoise ocean waters, and rich historical heritage of this exotic country. So she dreamed of finally seeing all this alluring beauty with her own eyes and immersing herself in the atmosphere of Thailand that attracts tourists from all over the world. After completing her business meetings, Miriam boarded a plane and headed to Bangkok with the intention of exploring the sights and corners of the kingdom on her own. Traveling alone always entails certain risks and dangers, but she had considerable experience in such trips and knew how to behave in a foreign country so as not to endanger herself. She strictly followed simple safety rules. Do not go out alone after dark, keep valuables with you, and be on the lookout for strangers. Although Miriam always felt relatively safe during her travels, she realized that a young woman traveling alone should be prepared for unforeseen situations. Unfortunately, we can never be sure what intentions lie behind the thoughts of others and whether they are up to no good. Miriam, however, did not let her fears and doubts overshadow her eagerness to fully enjoy the warm Thai sunshine, the friendly smiles of the locals, and the fabulous scenery. Shortly after arriving in Bangkok, the girl went on an excursion to Pattaya in the southeast of the country, not far from which the mysterious island of Koh Chang is located. On Sunday, April 7, 2019, 26-year-old Miriam Belt bought a ferry ticket and headed directly to the island, planning to spend a few hours there and return to Pattaya in the evening after an exciting program of activities. Her plans were simple: to taste the delicious local. Her plans were simple: to try the delicious local seafood, visit the ancient temples dotted around the island, and soak up the coastal atmosphere and enjoy the sea breeze. Around noon, Miriam arrived in Cochin and immediately rented a motorcycle, one of the most popular forms of transportation in Thailand. She planned her route in advance using Google Maps and set off to see the sights. Among the locations she chose was a white stone temple located on top of a hill. This shrine is known for the Buddha's footprint and is considered very important to Buddhists. The temple is located in a picturesque corner of the island, and the hilltop offers a breathtaking view of the surrounding scenery. Miriam likes such quiet places, where she could enjoy spiritual and cultural sights alone, without the noisy crowds of tourists. However, she could not even imagine the terrible fate that befell her in this seemingly peaceful and gracious place. Having reached the desired location, Miriam left her rented motorcycle at the foot of the hill, nodded affably to the flower vendor, and headed up the stone steps to the temple. To get to the shrine, it was necessary to overcome a rather steep and tiring section, which only physically fit people could do. A CCTV camera recorded the girl climbing the stone steps to the monument. Usually it takes about 5 minutes to get there and back. Miriam reached the temple, but no one else saw her alive. This seemed strange because the stone steps were the only way back down the hill. There were simply no other entrances or paths. Miriam's rented motorcycle was still parked at the foot of the hill next to the flower stand. Despite all the beauty of the temple, there were no other interesting places on the top of the hill, worthy of staying there for a long time. The main question was why the girl had stayed there for so long, and why she hadn't returned. Traveling alone, Miriam often dropped out of social media for several hours, completely immersed in reality. However, when the day turned into night on April 7 and she still did not get in touch, her family and friends in Germany began to worry, fearing that something bad might have happened to her. The next morning, on Monday, April 8th, a young Thai tourist decided to walk along a remote path leading to a white stone temple with a Buddha's footprint. Halfway up the path, he noticed a small crevice on the side of the stairs that caught his eye because of its unusual shape. Approaching it, he was horrified to find the body of a young woman with fair skin. She was dead, lying between two huge boulders in a pool of her own blood. The body was covered with old branches, leaves, and other debris. The tourist immediately reported the gruesome discovery to law enforcement. Investigators soon arrived at the scene. The deceased was a German woman, Miriam Belt, who had disappeared the day before. After examining the girl's body, the police concluded that her death was not accidental. She couldn't have slipped, fallen into the gorge, and died. Miriam was not wearing any clothes, one of her legs was broken, and numerous injuries were visible on her head and face, as if caused by a heavy blunt object, such as a brick or stone. Unfortunately, it soon became clear that she had also been raped before her death. However, what exactly happened to the tourist remained a mystery at the time. The White Stone Buddha Temple had only one entrance and exit, which were monitored by video surveillance cameras. It was they who recorded Miriam climbing the hill. It soon became clear that a young man was following the girl up the stairs, and he immediately became one of the main suspects. The video footage showed the man arriving at the bottom of the hill on a motorcycle and parking. He then briefly talked to a flower stall seller and bought a small bouquet of dahlias from him. After that, the stranger walked back to the temple. The flower seller saw the young man walk quickly after Miriam, and sometime later the same stranger returned from the stairs with traces of something light on his dark clothes, looking like dirt or possibly blood. The man asked the suspicious visitor if he was okay, to which he waved his hand and replied that he had just fallen. The shopkeeper immediately became suspicious, so he tried to memorize the unconscious young man's appearance and wrote down the make and license plate of his motorcycle just in case. And it was not in vain, because after Miriam Belt's body was discovered, the florist passed all the information he had gathered to the police. Investigators soon found out that the motorcycle was registered in the name of a 24-year-old local man, Ranakorn Ramrun. Ranakorn was an indigenous resident of the island of Cochabamba. The young man lived alone, had a small boat business and a motorcycle. He worked as a garbage collector on the beaches. During the day, he traveled around the coast by boat, collecting garbage from the water and also cleaned the area on the shore. Ranakorn was described by his fellow villagers as a quiet and calm guy who preferred solitude. After work, he usually returned home, turned on the TV, and enjoyed a beer. It seemed that the 24-year-old's life was typical for his age. However, few people knew that Ranakorn had dark secrets of his own, which he carefully concealed. The young man suffered from a serious drug addiction and regularly used illegal substances, rarely being sober. The day after the murder of Miriam Belt, when Ranakorn Ramrun returned home from work in the evening, he was detained and arrested. The suspect was taken to the police station for interrogation, and within hours he confessed to everything. The case of the German tourist's murder was solved within 24 hours of her death. Ranakorn said that on the morning of April 7th, a Sunday, he woke up, and instead of having breakfast, he drank 2 beers and 2 glasses of hard liquor. But this was not enough for the guy. He was drawn to drugs. He took another dose, got on his motorcycle, and went for a ride around the island. His ride ended at the foot of the Temple Mountain, where he first saw Miriam climbing the stone steps. It was then that the unkind thought of the fair-skinned beauty flashed into Ranakorn's gloomy mind. His drunken imagination drew ugly pictures, and he decided to act. Noticing a flower stand nearby, the young man bought a small bouquet of dahlias, hoping that an attractive stranger would appreciate his gallantry. With flowers in hand, he began to climb the stairs after Miriam. Catching up with her, Ranakorn tried to strike up a conversation. The girl felt uncomfortable when the stranger gave her the flowers and then proposed a shameless act right on the hillside before reaching the temple. Miriam refused. She found herself alone with the stranger in a deserted place, and he asked her frankly inappropriate questions. The frightened girl had no choice but to turn around and run away. Ranakorn, however, was not about to take no for an answer and ran after her. In a moment, he caught up with his victim, grabbed her and dragged her into the bushes. Miriam screamed and struggled with all her might, but no one could hear her or come to her aid. I will not describe all the horrific details of this crime. I will only say that when the rapist finished his heinous deed, Miriam managed to escape from his grasp. She ran down the hill, trying to get away from this monster as quickly as possible. Then another evil thought flashed into Ranakorn's gloomy head, to catch up with the girl and kill her. Otherwise she would escape, and he would be imprisoned. Jumping to his feet and tearing off his clothes, he ran after her with all his might. Unfortunately, Miriam slipped on the way down and injured her leg, panicked and terrified. Ranakorn caught up with her, grabbed a huge rock that was lying nearby, and began to beat her over the head. Miriam died on the spot from her injuries. Ranakorn's only mistake was trying to hide the body. He dragged the dead girl up the slope, threw her between boulders, and lightly covered her with old leaves, branches, and debris. However, the corpse was still visible right from the stairs leading to the temple. So the next morning, Miriam was found by a Thai tourist heading to the top of the hill. After committing the crime, Ronicorn returned home, immediately washed his bloody clothes, and then collapsed on the couch, turned on the TV, and smoked a pack of Xanabrat cigarettes. It was his last evening at large, as it hadn't even been a day since he had been arrested. After confessing to everything, he took part in the reconstruction of the crime, describing in detail the last minutes of Miriam Belt's life. During the investigative experiment, the suspect's head was covered with a bag to hide his identity from prying eyes. Thai authorities closely monitored the investigation. 3 months after the tragedy, the trial began. The main evidence of Ronicorn's guilt was CCTV footage, the testimony of a flower seller, and his own confession. The young man never apologized for his actions, but his mother apologized in court on behalf of her son. The woman said that she and Ronicorn lived separately, and she had no idea what her son was doing. Her son's actions shocked her to the core. The woman said that she and Ronicorn were separated, and she had no idea what her son was doing. Her son's actions shocked her to the core, and she urged the court to punish him to the fullest extent of the law. The highest penalty for murder in Thailand is the death penalty. Ronicorn's mother admitted that she was afraid to let her son go free because he might repeat his heinous crime and take someone else's life. The woman suggested that he be sentenced to life imprisonment or even execution. Ronicorn Ramran pleaded guilty to the murder of Miriam Belt. He was sentenced to death by hanging for this brutal and heinous crime. It is known that the murderer is still on death row, awaiting the day of his execution. Residents of Koken Island were shocked and stunned by the news of the death of the 26-year-old German tourist. Thailand is generally considered to be a very peaceful country, so the fact that a local resident behaved so cruelly and disrespectfully with a visitor was truly horrifying. Such an atrocity has never happened on Cochin before, so the islanders hope that this story will not affect their future lives and will not scare tourists away from visiting the island. The community of Cochabamba rallied to express condolences to the victim's family. People of all ages and professions came to the place where Miriam's body was found, bringing candles, flowers, and wreaths, crying and praying for the murdered girl, expressing their condolences to her family. It is no secret that Thailand's financial well-being is largely dependent on the tourism industry. Negative incidents of this kind can cause serious damage to the financial situation of the entire country. That is why the Thai authorities always try to solve crimes committed against foreigners as soon as possible. However, unfortunately, there are often cases when information about such tragedies is simply hushed up and not allowed to be released to the press. After Ronicorn's sentencing, local police assured that there were no more villains on Cochin, and only polite and friendly people lived there. Residents of the island urged tourists not to be afraid to come here, despite the fact that Cochabamba's reputation has suffered somewhat. Of course, this is nothing compared to the extent to which Miriam and her family have suffered. Miriam Belt was a bright young woman who was just starting out in life. She was an exemplary worker with great plans for the future, which, unfortunately, were never realized. A typical suburb appeared in a horrifying way, with blood that chilled the soul, and the walls were painted with it. Finally, there was the imprint of a small child's hand, as if someone had drawn a terrifying curtain for a horrific performance. It was this ugly picture that Jennifer O'Brien found when she came to her parents' house to pick up her son Nathan. The case seemed so disgusting and gruesome that many people found it hard to accept it as reality. However, it did happen, and the whole country followed the investigation closely. The story took place in Park Hill, a quiet neighborhood in Calgary, Canada, known for its peacefulness and friendly residents. Park Hill is a picturesque place with neat houses, trees lining the streets, well-developed infrastructure, parks, and a welcoming atmosphere. There was an aura of tranquility that made the neighborhood desirable for many families. These features attracted the Likeness family. Alvin Lickness, a 66-year-old beloved grandfather and father, was a respected figure in his family and at work. He was looking forward to a new chapter in his life after retirement. His wife, Katya, 53, was the family's backbone, a devoted wife and the closest friend of his daughter. Her caring nature created a cozy home for the family. They lived in Park Hill for many years, but decided to purchase a smaller home in Edmonton. Alvin and Kathy Likeness were on the verge of retirement. They put their house on the market, complete with furniture, and began packing for the move. They were not afraid of the challenges ahead. After a hard day, the tired but happy husband and wife found solace in the laughter and jokes of their grandchildren, as well as the support of their friends. Jennifer O'Brien's daughter visited her parents' house for the last time with her sons, including 5-year-old Nathan. In a week, her parents were to leave this place forever. Jenny felt sad because she had spent her childhood and youth there, along with her 4 siblings. Alvin and Kati rented an apartment in Mazatlan, where they planned to spend the winter under the warm Mexican sun before moving to Edmonton. But they were not to enjoy a peaceful retirement. The next day, their dreams turned into a terrible fog that enveloped everything around them. Nathan O'Brien was a cheerful boy with a chubby face and always tousled tan hair. He was the middle of Jennifer's 3 children. Because of his love of superhero costumes and friendly disposition, the kid was a favorite of everyone around him. He easily made friends both among his peers and their parents, and tirelessly learned new things. Jennifer and the children had a great time at their parents' home in Park Hill. As the evening wore on, Jenny decided to stay the night rather than drive home with 3 children in the dark. Nathan, who had been playing outdoors, fell asleep instantly, and the youngest, Max, could not sleep in an unfamiliar bed. At 10:45 p.m., Jenny took her 2 sons home, leaving Nathan to sleep with his mother, planning to pick him up in the morning. The boy had long wanted to spend the night at his grandparents' house, and she did not want to deny him that. On June 30th, 2014, Jennifer came to her parents' house in the morning to pick up her son. But what she saw was beyond imagination. The front door was wide open, and inside the house, there were pools of blood and a heavy corpse stench. There was blood everywhere, on the beds, walls, floor. In the corridor, there were bloody shoe prints and footprints, as if someone had been dragged. The most horrifying thing was a child's handprint on the wall, as if the boy had been leaning on it to keep from falling. Jenny was horrified to realize that neither her parents nor her 5-year-old son were in the house. She immediately called her husband, exclaiming that their entire family had probably been killed and their bodies taken away. Then, in hysterics, she called the emergency number and repeated the same thing. The dispatcher told her to get in her car immediately and lock the doors in case the perpetrator was still around. Jennifer sat behind the wheel, looking at her parents' house, where she had experienced so many happy moments. The picture of the wall with her son's handprint on it impressed her for a long time. She could not understand what was really happening. The police arrived quickly, and upon entering the house, it was as if they were on the set of a horror movie. They thoroughly searched all the rooms but found no bodies. The grandparents and little Nathan had disappeared without a trace. After an emergency was declared, a large-scale search for the missing trio began. The police hoped to the last that the kidnappers were holding them somewhere, despite the horrific picture at home. Law enforcement officers collected DNA samples from the likenesses home, but they did not find a single trace or fingerprint of the alleged perpetrator. During the collection of physical evidence, investigators found a tooth that probably belonged to Alvin, the owner of the house. Blood on 20-pound dumbbells in the garage also matched his genetic material. The lock on the side door had been broken, suggesting that someone had brutally murdered the 3 people by entering through that door at night. Officers also interviewed about 200 visitors to the estate sale. Initially, many Calgarians thought it was some kind of family conflict. The grandparents had taken the boy for some reason and didn't want to give him back to his parents. The public was simply not informed about the horrors that took place in the house. When hundreds of police officers, tirelessly searching for the missing family, found no trace of Nathan and the likenesses, they returned to their starting point, their home, hoping to find the boy alive at least. The detectives hypothesized that perhaps the child had witnessed something terrible, hid somewhere, but was unable to get out on his own. They thoroughly searched pantries, back rooms, looked under beds, everywhere Nathan could hide, but he was not there. For several weeks, the police believed that the likenesses and Nathan were being held captive, and that the injuries they sustained in their home might not have been fatal. But as time passed, their hope faded. All this time, they were looking for the missing trio, but no bodies were found. It became obvious that this was not just a kidnapping, but a mass murder of 3 family members. The perpetrator remained at large. The police held several press conferences, finally informing the public that a brutal attack had taken place in the likeness home. The only thing they had was a house with pools of blood and a lot of unanswered questions. The boy's parents, who could not bear the thought that their son might be dead, addressed him directly from the TV screens. They reminded Nathan that he was a superhero and could overcome anything, that they would soon find him and take him home. Jennifer begged her son to be strong and not be afraid. Those who heard her words were in tears because, unlike the mother, they were not sure that the child was alive. Everyone understood the bitterness of the parents' grief, but did not know how to help them. The emergency notification did not yield any concrete results. In a few days, more than 1,300 messages were received from different places. Residents of neighboring homes and institutions made efforts to help solve this horrific crime. They sent police archives of video footage from that night, so much so that the department's computer system crashed. Detectives analyzed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, looking for suspicious details, until finally something subtle caught their attention. On the night of the disappearance of Alvin, Katya, and 5-year-old Nathan, a car was seen circling the Park Hill neighborhood several times. In one video footage, a person emerged near the likeness home before dawn. Shortly afterward, the pickup moved north toward the town of Airdrie. In its back was an object covered with a white cloth. Law enforcement immediately distributed flyers with a photo of a Ford F-150 pickup truck from the late 1980s and early 1990s that had been seen that fateful night on the street where the likeness family lived. Parents were asked to look for this vehicle and the driver, who might have information about the missing Nathan and grandparents. The publication of this image turned out to be a very successful step. A woman who recognized the pickup truck contacted the police. Reddy Garland was sure she had seen the same vehicle before. A very similar pickup truck had been parked at her parents' house the night before when she had visited with her common-law husband, Alan Lickness, whose parents and nephew had gone missing. The owner of this pickup was Reddy's 56-year-old brother, Douglas Garland. As a young man, Douglas was expelled from medical school for fraud after suffering a nervous breakdown. He was repeatedly arrested for assault and illegal weapons, but was never charged. He simply avoided punishment. In 1992, he was convicted for a drug lab found on his farm. To avoid imprisonment, Douglas fled to British Columbia, assuming the identity of Matthew Kemper Hartley, a teenager from Alberta who had died in a car accident. Under this name, he worked in a laboratory for 7 years, and when he was fired, he registered as unemployed and quietly received payments, hiding under an assumed identity. In 2000, he was arrested and sentenced to 6 months in prison for drug trafficking and identity theft. Psychologists attributed his crimes to mental disorders, effectively deeming Douglas incapable of violent acts. So after 6 months, he was released. In July 2014, police detained Douglas Garland again at a bus stop. In July 2014, the police again detained Douglas Garland at a bus stop and imprisoned him on a previous charge of forgery. He was very quiet and did not tell the police anything. They immediately allowed a thorough search of Douglas's household out of concern that Lickness and Nathan might be alive, but in danger. The police did not even wait for a search warrant. This was a legal exception in extraordinary circumstances. The emergency response team launched a potential rescue operation. As part of the hostage rescue operation, they were to storm the 16-hectare farm in Hector, where Douglas lived with his elderly parents. This was the most serious trail. However, no one was found dead or alive on the farm. The only thing that caught my eye was a barrel near the greenhouse. Something was smoldering there. There were only ashes inside the barrel, no blood and no physical evidence, so Douglas had to be released on bail under strict conditions, not to come near the farm. At the same time, law enforcement obtained a warrant for a thorough search, and more than 300 officers combed every corner of the vast territory, adjacent fields and swamps. While the experts were examining the premises on the farm, detectives found books and manuals with gruesome graphic images in the deep basement. During a further search, they found boxes of handcuffs, some so small they could hold children's hands. Other findings included handsaw blades, leather belts, bone saws, knives, guns, and a straitjacket. Law enforcement also came across a computer hard drive hidden under the basement ceiling. It contained a lot of thorough research on violence. Douglas had downloaded a lot of instructions from the internet. how to attack victims in the morning for the effect of surprise, information on methods of painful torture, guides on killing without emotion, and so on. On the bookshelves were books about poisons and brutal crimes. There were also images of his intimate fantasies and obsessions. Douglas had a real fetish for adult diapers, and there were several photos of men and women with their hands and feet tied in these diapers, presumably murdered. In the isolated basement, there was also a set for dressing up as a woman. Prosthetic breasts, two couples with long blonde hair, women's clothes on hangers, and a huge collection of 89 pairs of different shoes. Boots, shoes, and sneakers to fit Douglas's size. There was an empty shoebox in the closet. The sole print could be compared to the footprint in the likeness house, but unfortunately the shoes themselves were nowhere to be found. What the police did not find were the bodies. They literally inspected the area on their knees, moving side by side through the tall grass, but in vain. Meanwhile, without hesitation, Douglas violated his bail and returned to his farm without the knowledge of the Calgary police. Detectives followed him, suspecting that he would try to get rid of the evidence in his basement. He was arrested for the second time when Douglas was making his way through dense brush with a police helicopter buzzing overhead. He was accused of the murders of Nathan O'Brien, Katia, and Alvin. 2 weeks have passed since the disappearances. Despite the absence of bodies, Douglas has been charged with a number of crimes, backed by an impressive 1,400 pieces of evidence. Whether this man was the one who had carried out the brutal midnight attack on Alvin and Katia, not even sparing 5-year-old Nathan, remained to be seen. The police continued to investigate relentlessly. They decided to examine the contents of a smoldering barrel that they had noticed during the first search of the farm. While sifting the ashes from the barrel, the forensic experts came across a shocking discovery. Among the hot coals were a child's tooth, charred pieces of flesh, metal eyeglass frames, and numerous fragments of human bones. Further investigation revealed that Douglas Garland, Alvin, and Katie Lickness had a long history of tangled affairs. Reddy Garland, Douglas's sister, who reported the pickup truck to the police, was the common-law wife of Alan Likeness, one of Alvin and Katie's sons. A key detail that caught the investigators' attention was that the two men had worked together several years earlier. In 2006, when Alvin, a successful businessman, was looking for a partner, his son Alan suggested Douglas. Douglas, with some education and experience, collaborated with Alvin in developing a pump for the oil and gas industry. It was Lickness's invention, and he hired Douglas to improve the pump. However, the project was never realized, forcing the entrepreneur to terminate the agreement with Douglas. Their partnership ended in early 2007 when Douglas simply stopped answering his phone. Alvin patented the pump he and Douglas had been working on, but received no money for it. Although Douglas's claim was essentially based on nothing, it's not as if he was robbed of millions of dollars. After losing his job, he became incredibly irritated. The dismissal rekindled a deep-seated resentment that eventually grew into hatred and seems to have resulted in a horrific massacre of the entire family of the perceived enemy. It is believed that Douglas did not intend to harm Nathan, but the boy should not have survived as a witness to his crime. This soulless creature did not care about the age of the victims. His goal was to take revenge for the insult to his own pride. In January 2017, Douglas Garland's trial for a triple brutal murder began in a crowded Calgary courtroom. He denied guilt on all 3 charges. He did not file any motions throughout the trial. The high-profile trial shocked the entire nation, with the public following the case more closely than any other criminal case in the country. The day before they disappeared, Alvin and Katie were having a garage sale, preparing to sell their house and move to a smaller place. They were to leave this home for good in a week and begin a well-deserved retirement. Douglas was running out of time and decided to act fast. For years, he had harbored a grudge against Alvin Lickness over a patent for a pump they had once collaborated on. The fact that the device had never been sold and had not made any profit did not bother Douglas. His resentment and anger had been building all these years, and on that day, June 30th, 2014, he finally decided to put his criminal plan into action. Before dawn, Douglas entered the Likeness's home by drilling a lock on the side door. Instructions on how to bypass such locks were also found on his computer hard drive. While the entire family was sleeping soundly, the intruder went into the bedroom where Alvin was sleeping and struck him several times with something heavy, like a stick. Then he went to the guest room where, According to the DNA, the grandmother and grandson were sleeping. Judging by the large amount of blood, the woman was also struck with a blunt object, but the exact weapon was not identified. The cause of Nathan's injuries was also not clear, but there was undoubtedly bleeding. Despite the significant amount of blood in the couple's home, forensic experts are convinced that all three were alive when Douglas pulled them out of bed and into his pickup truck. Most likely, he transported the bound bodies in the back of the car, covering them with a white cloth, which was seen on video surveillance. The perpetrator left no traces of DNA or fingerprints, and his internet searches suggest that he had studied detailed instructions on how to do this in advance. The man then drove his three victims to a spacious house on his parents' farm, 20 miles away, where Nathan and his grandparents were to be subjected to the most horrific torment. DNA from all three was found on various torture instruments, meat hooks, bone saws, and knives. Genetic material that matched the profiles of all three victims was also found on a pair of rubber boots near one of the outbuildings on the Douglas farm. In addition, a bloody light switch inside the building matched the DNA profiles of the likeness couple. A computer forensics expert testified about the photos of Katia and Alvin found among the deleted files on Douglas's hard drive. The perpetrator followed the lives of his so-called enemies through social media. Douglas's mother also testified against her son, describing him as a lonely man who had absolutely no friends. But the elderly woman added that her son was an intelligent man who loved to read books and help with the housework. According to her, Douglas earned a bachelor's degree in college and then transferred to the University of Alberta, but due to a nervous breakdown, he only studied there for a month. When she saw a TV report about the disappearance of three members of the Lickness family and told Douglas about it, he said he didn't want to discuss Alvin. Unfortunately, she did not hear her son go out the night the three disappeared, so she was unable to provide the court with any specific details. Her daughter, Reddy, made her son take pictures of her brother's pickup truck and sent them to the police. It was her actions that helped investigators solve the case. However, the defense attorney, as expected, insisted that there was no concrete forensic or scientific evidence that Douglas was at the Licknesses' house on the night of the attack. No one saw or can confirm that it was the defendant who took the life of the boy and his grandparents. There is not even any information about the motive for their deaths. According to the defense, he must be fully acquitted. At 9:30 a.m. on July 1, 2014, the day after the incident at the Likeness home, a small plane from an aerial photography company flew over Airdrie airspace, mapping the city and two small suburbs of Calgary. Every 3 seconds it took pictures, and by an almost unbelievable coincidence, two of these photos became evidence in court and largely decided the fate of the case against Douglas Garland. The photos showed three torsos lying face down on the ground near three outbuildings south of the main house. Two of them were clearly adults, completely naked except for some white cloth wrapped around their waists. Presumably, given Douglas's fetish, these were adult diapers. Experts were even able to determine the approximate height of these people. Two were 6 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 6 inches tall, and the third figure was much smaller. The small figure was lying on his side in the grass, curled up next to a barrel for burning. The adults appeared to have had their heads cut off. The pilot of the mapping plane testified that during the next flight over the farm 26 hours later, the bodies were no longer in the photographs. In this tragic case, the silence of the victims rings out piercingly. There are no bodies left, only tiny fragments. The only evidence of their existence on this planet was the ashes in the waste barrel. The pieces of flesh and bone belonged to 5-year-old Nathan and his grandparents. It seems that after beheading them, the killer decided to burn the bodies in a process similar to cremation. As the horrific details of the heinous crimes were revealed in the courtroom, Douglas remained unfazed and even took notes. He never showed any regret for his actions. None of the victims' relatives could testify at the trial, but a written statement from Nathan's father, Rod O'Brien, was read in the courtroom. In the letter, the man said that they did not have enough time to enjoy their son, and now they do not even have the opportunity to properly bury him, as there is virtually nothing left of him. After several hours of traumatic testimony and approximately 10 hours of deliberations, the jury convicted the defendant. The judge who heard the case of the brutal triple murder in Calgary showed no mercy. He sentenced Douglas Garland, who was found guilty of the deaths of Nathan O'Brien, his grandparents Alvin and Katya Likeness, to the harshest possible punishment. This is 3 terms of 25 years each, without the right to early release for 75 years. Theoretically, Douglas will be able to apply for clemency only at the age of 129. On the day of the sentencing, Douglas was severely beaten by several inmates in the prison and suffered serious injuries. After that, other inmates repeatedly mocked him for killing 3 innocent people, including a 5-year-old boy, over a senseless insult that happened several years ago. The heartbreaking events that unfolded around the Likeness and Nathan families had a profound impact on the families and the community at large. The emptiness of losing Alvin, Katya, and little Nathan was immeasurable. The repercussions of this tragedy reverberated not only in the courtroom, but also in the hearts of those who knew and loved the family. Words cannot express the grief felt by the parents of the deceased boy. Although they spoke to the press every day, both refused to discuss any details of the horrific crime. Jennifer and Rod overcame hardships day after day, raising 2 sons and trying to adjust to life without their little superhero. Faced with incredible grief, Nathan's parents, Rod and Jennifer, found a way to turn their pain into something positive. They founded the Nathan O'Brien Children's Foundation, a beacon of hope known for changing the lives of disadvantaged children. Their mission is to honor the memory of the fallen boy by giving other children the opportunity to live, hope, and realize their dreams. Nathan loved sports, so the founders of the foundation organized sports events for children every year, teaching them how to play hockey, imagining how much the boy would have enjoyed participating in these competitions. Another thing that Nathan loved was talking to his father before going to bed. Their last conversation is forever etched in Rod's memory. The son started asking his father what heaven was like, which was strange to hear from a 5-year-old. But Nathan dreamed of becoming a superhero and flying through the sky, cutting through the clouds with his hands. He told his father that he would meet them in heaven when they died. Rod even thought that his son had somehow sensed that this would happen soon. Nathan's mother, Jenny, watches her son's friends grow up with tears in her eyes, realizing that she will never see the adult he would have become. The case of the Likenesses and O'Briens is a tragic page in Calgary's history that has left an incurable wound in the hearts of not only the city's citizens, but the entire country and the world. Let the story of the untimely deaths of Alvin, Katya, and little Nathan serve as a reminder that we must value our families and strive for a world where kindness prevails over cruelty, anger, and hatred. This is the end of the story. Please like the video and leave your thoughts in the comments.